Howdy, Immortalium here, and today I'm going to be reviewing Under the Air by Osamu Tezuka. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Under the Air is a collection of seinen short stories that Osamu Tezuka wrote between 1968 to 1970. As Osamu Tezuka very interestingly puts it, in the afterword, he notes that these stories have little to no connection to each other, and that the decision to release them originally in 2 volumes in Japanese, the 2 volumes were then compiled into 1 volume for the English release, was a decision on the publisher's part. But the question is, how good are these stories? And that's what I'm going to be discussing today. So let's get started. Usually when I'm reviewing a manga, I will be discussing its story, its characters. However, because this is a short story collection, I instead want to discuss the types of stories that you're going to be reading here. So, Under the Air has 14 short stories, and the majority of these stories are set in quote-unquote modern day. I say quote-unquote modern day because it's set in 1968 to 1970, i.e. when it was released. There are a couple of outliers here. There's one story set in the American West. There's a couple of stories set in more kind of science fiction-y environments, but in general these are set in quote-unquote modern day. The types of stories that you read here are quite interesting. In particular, many people note the very first story, which is actually quite appropriate to the modern day, dealing with white supremacy. There are also a variety of other stories regarding revenge, regarding fear and paranoia. I do have to confess that while certain stories are very interesting and very engaging, some of the stories in this collection I found kind of mediocre, and a lot of that comes down to how it ends. Now, there are plenty of stories here that have very interesting endings, usually with a twist or a revelation, but some of these stories, to me at least, kind of peter out, and that removes some of my enthusiasm for some of these stories. Not to mention that some of these short stories feel more like ideas than proper stories. And as Osamu Tezuka very interestingly puts it in his afterword, he notes that many of these stories could have been made into longer series, and I don't doubt that. I don't disagree with that. But some of these stories feel too short to actually develop the themes and ideas that he wishes to engage with. And so, overall, my thoughts on this collection of short stories from Osamu Tezuka are that some of them are very good, some of them are very interesting, but some of them I think are underdeveloped, some of them have lackluster endings, and because of that I feel a bit mixed towards this short story collection. Now, with regards to the quality of the artwork, this is very much in his seinen style, and those familiar with many of his other seinen titles from around the time, such as A Record of Glass Castle or Alabaster, will be very familiar with this particular art style. And that is, Tezuka was reacting to the Gekiga movement and was introducing more detail and more realism into his manga. Now, this does very much line up with many of his other titles in the sense that he never removes that cartoony art style that he is known for. And I do have to say that in general the quality of the artwork here is quite good. However, there is a couple of pieces of artwork here that I do feel are a little lacking looking, or kind of remind me of his very old artwork from the 1950s, oddly enough. Overall, while I do think that the artwork here is quite good, and of course Tezuka's panel work is, as usual, fantastic, I do think that it is a little more uneven in quality in comparison to some of those other titles that I mentioned before. Now, with regards to how Digital Manga Publishing released this manga, I have to say that the news here is very good. The paper quality is very good. As noted with my Yotsuba, it is, as usual, a larger size to allow the artwork to breathe more, which is excellent. As I mentioned with my other Digital Manga Publishing Tezuka titles, this manga does have page numbers, and usually I wouldn't mention that, except that there was a period of time where Digital Manga Publishing released some Tezuka manga with no page numbers, which I found very annoying. Don't worry, there are page numbers in this collection. And just some really nice little additions here. One thing I really like is that once you've finished all of these stories, they actually have a page that tells you when these manga were actually published, what month, what year. And I think that is excellent, an excellent addition to this manga. In addition, as I've mentioned before, there's an afterword from Osamu Tezuka, and interestingly, this seems to be one of his more positive afterwords, where he speaks about the fact that he loves all of the stories in this collection. I can't share in that enthusiasm from him, but I do think that it's a very nice addition to this, and overall I think Digital Manga Publishing actually did a really good job releasing this manga. Overall, what are my thoughts on Under the Air by Osamu Tezuka? As I mentioned before, I think that there are some really good stories in here. I think that there are some stories that kind of peter out, whether it be due to the lack of development of the themes or ideas that Osamu Tezuka was tackling, or due to kind of a bit of a mediocre ending that kind of lacked punch. I love the artwork as usual, even though I find it more uneven than some of his other titles from the time. So overall, I think this is a very interesting read, and I would definitely recommend it to Osamu Tezuka fans. As of the recording of this video, this manga is available to purchase from eManga, whether that be a physical edition or a digital release. That is the only way you're going to be able to pick it up. So overall, I would definitely recommend this to Osamu Tezuka fans. But for those seeking out Osamu Tezuka for the first time, there are plenty of better examples that you could be picking up. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment, rate, subscribe, and bye-bye.